What would you do if a ghost from your husband's past was a living nightmare operating under your roof? I thought buying my $2 million mansion was our happily ever after. Instead, a single phone call exposed a deception so toxic it nearly cost me my freedom and my life. Like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart someone who dared to play you for a fool. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with no operating budget to continue producing these videos for you. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are longer, feature highly detailed situations we cannot share publicly on YouTube, and are brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story. And my name is Eva Guzman. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior cybersecurity architect at Vanguard Nexus Tech. My daily reality involves designing impenetrable firewall systems and protecting highly classified intelligence data from international threats. In my line of work, paranoia is not a flaw. It is a fundamental survival skill. I am trained to spot vulnerabilities in massive digital infrastructures and to anticipate zero-day exploits before they happen. But I completely missed the fatal flaw operating right inside my own life. Just weeks ago, I drained my entire life savings to purchase a $2 million mansion in a heavily wooded, isolated suburb just outside of Chicago. It was a massive financial risk, but it was supposed to be our sanctuary, the ultimate reward for years of grueling corporate warfare. My husband, Julian, who is 35 and a commercial construction architect, played the role of the endlessly supportive partner flawlessly. He was attentive, charming, and always seemed to anticipate my needs with pinpoint accuracy. But looking back, the warning signs were all there, cleverly disguised as acts of profound devotion. Almost immediately after we got the keys to the property, Julian developed a bizarre, relentless obsession with the basement of the new house. Given my need to handle classified government data at home, we had agreed to build a secure home office. Julian insisted on doing the renovations entirely by himself, refusing to hire outside contractors. He called it his ultimate labor of love, a custom-built secure server room just for his brilliant wife. He sealed the heavy oak door with a military-grade biometric lock and forbade anyone, including me, from stepping foot down there until the project was absolutely perfect. I thought it was incredibly sweet at the time. I was so blinded by the romance of the gesture that my normally razor-sharp professional instincts went completely dormant. Then came the anomalies. They were tiny, seemingly insignificant glitches in our domestic perfection. Being a network specialist, I naturally monitor my own home internet traffic using a customized dashboard. Around midnight, for several consecutive nights, I noticed our internal network experiencing sudden, massive drops in bandwidth. It looked exactly like a heavy encrypted data upload to a remote server. But whenever I checked the system logs, the source IP was professionally masked. When I asked Julian about it over breakfast, he casually brushed it off, claiming his architectural rendering software was running heavy cloud backups while we slept. It made perfect sense structurally, but my gut felt a slight, undeniable pinch of doubt. Add to that the scent. Recently, Julian had started wearing a sharp, metallic cologne. It was a sterile, unfamiliar fragrance I had never purchased for him. When I leaned in to kiss him goodbye in the mornings, that foreign scent lingered heavily on his collar. Completely out of character for a man who previously only wore the warm, earthy aftershave I bought him every Christmas. The illusion finally shattered on the morning of our 6th day in the new house. Julian had just backed his car out of the long driveway, heading to a construction site downtown. I was standing in the kitchen, brewing my first cup of coffee and enjoying the quiet, when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown local number. I answered it, and on the other end was Eleanor, the elderly widow who had sold us the property just last month. Her voice was not just shaking, It was entirely hollowed out by pure visceral terror. "Eva, please, you have to listen to me very carefully," she whispered, her breath hitching with every single word. "I did something highly illegal, and I am so sorry, but you need to hear this right now." I froze, the ceramic coffee mug hovering mere inches from my mouth. "Eleanor, what is going on?" When I lived there alone, after my husband passed away, I was terrified of break-ins, she confessed, her voice cracking under the weight of her panic. "I hid a micro camera inside the ventilation grate of the large dehumidifier in the basement. It is wired directly into a hidden backup power supply. I swear to you, I completely forgot to remove it before we closed the sale on the house. I only remembered this morning when I got an automated cloud storage alert on my tablet." My architectural mind immediately mapped the basement layout. The dehumidifier was situated in the exact corner Julian had walled off for my new server racks. "Eleanor, that is a severe invasion of privacy," I said, my cold, professional tone automatically kicking in. "I am going to have to ask you to delete that access immediately and hand over the local drives." "No, Eva, listen to me," she practically screamed, the sheer, unadulterated panic in her voice stopping me dead in my tracks. "Do not go down to the basement. Do not walk down those stairs. And whatever you do not call the police right now. If they show up at your door, you might not survive the day." My blood ran completely cold, chilling my veins. "What exactly did you see on that camera, Eleanor?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the line. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. When she finally spoke, her words defied every logical parameter I had ever built my entire life upon. "I sent a secure link to your private email just now," she whispered, sounding as if she was weeping silently. "I am giving you the master access credentials to the cloud server. Eva, you need to look at the footage from 2 o'clock this morning, because I swear on my life, I saw things down there that do not belong to the world of the living." The line went dead. The silence in my brand new, $2 million house suddenly felt like a tomb. I opened my encrypted laptop, my hands trembling slightly as I clicked on the secure link waiting in my inbox. I locked the heavy mahogany door of the master bedroom, the metallic click echoing like a gunshot in the perfectly silent house. My breathing was shallow, tightly controlled by years of corporate crisis management training. I sat at the absolute edge of the mattress, placed my military-grade encrypted laptop on my knees, and navigated to the secure cloud directory Eleanor had provided. The interface loaded with a stark, sterile glow. I found the directory labeled with yesterday's date. I clicked on the video file time-stamped at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The grainy, green-hued night vision feed flickered to life. The camera angle was positioned high, looking down from the ventilation grate directly into the secure enclosure Julian had spent the last 5 days meticulously building. The heavy oak door swung open. Julian stepped into the frame. He was not alone. A figure followed him inside, cloaked in a heavy dark raincoat with the hood pulled low over their face. My initial, agonizingly human thought was infidelity. I braced myself for the sickening visual of my husband embracing another woman in the dark. But what actually unfolded on that screen was infinitely more monstrous than a simple affair. The figure pushed back the damp hood and shrugged off the heavy coat, stepping directly into the harsh overhead fluorescent light Julian had just flicked on. The breath violently escaped my lungs, leaving me entirely suffocating in the dry air of my bedroom. My heart physically stuttered in my chest, a cold, paralyzing dread flooding every single capillary in my body. It was Clara. Clara, Julian's first wife, the exact same Clara whose closed casket funeral Julian had wept over exactly 3 years ago, after a catastrophic boating accident on Lake Michigan supposedly claimed her life. I had stood by his side at her memorial service. I had held his hand through his endless months of grief. Yet here she was, standing in my basement at 2 o'clock in the morning, her face illuminated by the harsh lights, looking perfectly alive and terrifyingly focused. There was no passionate embrace between them. There was no illicit romance or steamy reunion. They moved with the synchronized, mechanical precision of a seasoned operative strike team. Julian approached the primary biometric server casing I had just finished configuring the day before. He bypassed the optical scanner using a cloned master key drive he must have secretly copied from my locked briefcase. The heavy steel door of the server rack swung open. Clara immediately stepped forward, pulling a heavy anti-static metallic case from beneath her sweater. She snapped the case open. Inside sat a stacked array of illegal solid-state drives. As a senior cybersecurity architect, my brain instantly recognized the hardware. These were not commercial drives. They were untraceable black market hardware, the specific kind used strictly for illegal data extraction and storage. Clara moved with chilling efficiency, physically splicing the rogue drives directly into the motherboard of my secure terminal. Then, the audio feed picked up their voices, clear and utterly devastating. "Are you absolutely certain her firewall will not detect the partition?" Clara asked, her voice cold and completely devoid of the bubbly warmth I had heard in old home videos. "Eva is brilliant, but she is incredibly arrogant," Julian replied. The sheer, unadulterated contempt in his voice felt like a physical blow to my jaw. "She trusts the physical security of this room because I built it for her. She will not run a deep physical diagnostic on the hardware for at least another month. By then, she will be sitting in a federal holding cell." I watched, completely paralyzed, as my husband systematically outlined my absolute destruction. "The data transfer is initiating," Clara stated, her fingers flying across a portable terminal she had plugged into the array. "We are uploading 4 terabytes of classified government intelligence data directly into her personal storage matrix. The overseas syndicate confirmed the encrypted payload is intact." "Perfect," Julian muttered, tightening a screw on the casing to hide the spliced wires. "The moment the drop is verified by the buyers, the syndicate wires $40 million into our untraceable offshore accounts. We make the anonymous tip to the Federal Bureau of Investigation this coming Sunday at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. They raid the house. They find the stolen national security data sitting perfectly on Eva's personal, biometric locked server. It is an open and shut case of corporate espionage and high treason." Clara smirked, a cruel, twisting expression that distorted her features. "And you are sure her security clearance was high enough to pull this off without raising flags during the initial download?" "That is the only reason I married the pathetic workaholic," Julian laughed, a sound so devoid of human empathy it made my skin physically crawl. "Her top-tier security badge is the golden ticket. By the time she realizes her credentials were used to authenticate the bypass, she will be looking at consecutive life sentences. We will be on a private jet to South America before she even gets her first phone call from the federal penitentiary." They continued to work, sealing my fate with every twisted wire and typed command. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal completely short-circuited my ability to feel sorrow. There were absolutely no tears. The naive woman who had loved Julian died in that bedroom, brutally murdered by the glowing pixels of a stolen camera feed. In her place, something entirely cold, deeply calculating, and ruthlessly logical took total control. I was not just losing my marriage. I was about to lose my freedom, my unblemished reputation, and my entire life to a living ghost and a sociopath. They were actively framing my house as a central drop point for an international cyber espionage ring. They had weaponized my own sanctuary against me, turning my $2 million home into a digital guillotine. But as I watched them wipe down the server casing to remove their fingerprints and turn off the lights, a chilling realization settled over my racing mind. Julian had built the physical walls of this trap, but he had fundamentally misunderstood the lethal capabilities of the digital architect he had just locked inside them. Any residual shock evaporated into the cold, sterile air of my bedroom. My tears dried before they could even form. I was staring straight down the barrel of a federal indictment, facing the total annihilation of my pristine career, the absolute loss of my freedom, and the end of my life as a functioning member of society. But as the sheer magnitude of their plot settled over me, a profound shift occurred within my mind. Julian had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had targeted a woman whose entire existence revolved around neutralizing catastrophic threats. He had effectively murdered his grieving, loving wife, and in doing so, he triggered the ruthless survival instincts of a senior cybersecurity architect. I stopped viewing my beautiful new home as a sanctuary of domestic bliss. It was now a compromised network, a hostile digital environment experiencing an active, highly sophisticated breach. My mind shifted automatically into strict incident response mode. In my line of work, the very first step of any system breach is always risk isolation. I had to contain the threat before neutralizing it. I pulled up the family tracking application on my phone. Julian's global positioning system signal pinged securely at his downtown commercial construction site, indicating he would be trapped in meetings for at least another 3 hours. The house was entirely mine. I changed into dark, unassuming clothes, grabbed my tactical hardware diagnostic bag, and headed down the hallway. I was about to execute a hostile infiltration into my own basement. Standing before the heavy oak door of the server room, I bypassed the biometric lock using a raw administrative override code Julian did not even know existed. Inside, the air conditioning units hummed, regulating the temperature for the heavy computing equipment. It looked exactly like the secure haven my husband promised, but to my eyes, it was an active crime scene. I pulled out a localized radio frequency spectrum analyzer from my bag. The device swept the room with invisible waves, searching for unauthorized signals. Within seconds, the digital needle on the screen jumped frantically, glowing bright red as it detected a strong, hidden transmission. I traced the signal to a spot behind the drywall, positioned perfectly below the main electrical breaker box. There it was. An illegally modified, covert cellular router was embedded within the wall cavity. It was actively pulsing, continuously transmitting heavily encrypted data packets to an obscured Internet Protocol address geolocated somewhere deep in Eastern Europe. My immediate, visceral human instinct was to grab a hammer, rip the drywall apart, and smash the rogue router into 1,000 useless pieces. But my professional training immediately overrode the violent impulse. Physical tampering was exactly what they were counting on. If I severed the physical connection, it would instantly trigger an automated dead man switch, sending an immediate silent alert directly to Julian's mobile phone. I could not afford to let them know that their target was fully awake and operating inside their closed loop. Instead of destroying the bridge, I decided to siphon their poison without disturbing the flow. I carefully patched my military encrypted laptop into the secondary, hidden diagnostic port of the infected server. My fingers flew across the keyboard, writing a highly customized, stealth extraction script in real time. I skillfully bypassed their crude, off-the-shelf alarm triggers and established a secure parallel data tunnel. Over the next 45 minutes, I sat in the freezing server room and silently mirrored every single byte of their stolen government intelligence. I funneled the massive, fraudulent data payload directly into an isolated, heavily encrypted offline drive of my own. Let them firmly believe their illicit drop was completely secure. I now held the absolute master copy of their own destruction. Once the transfer was complete, I erased my digital footprints from the server logs and retreated to my upstairs office. I locked the door and dedicated the entire night to a ruthless, forensic audit of Julian's digital footprint. I deployed automated tracking algorithms to dig through complex layers of obfuscated bank records, shell corporations, and hidden credit accounts. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the sickening scope of his financial parasitism became horrifyingly clear. Julian had not merely married me to use my top-tier security clearance, he had also weaponized my pristine credit score. Over the last 36 months, he had secretly taken out massive personal loans using my forged digital signature. He systematically funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars through decentralized cryptocurrency mixers, washing the money clean to anonymously fund Clara's new identity, her fake passports, and her life operating in the shadows. He had been slowly draining my financial lifeblood to resurrect his dead wife. The most logical standard protocol for an ordinary citizen would be to dial 911 immediately and hand the drives over to the federal authorities. But if I brought the police into the house right now, the situation would devolve into a chaotic, prolonged legal battle. Julian would hire expensive defense attorneys and claim I was having a severe psychotic break, arguing that I orchestrated the security breach myself to frame him in a fit of paranoia. Clara, armed with her fresh funds and completely untraceable phantom identity, would simply vanish back into the digital ether, completely untouchable by standard law enforcement. I absolutely refused to leave my fate in the hands of a sluggish, easily manipulated justice system. I did not just want to stop their data transfer, I wanted to engineer a trap so absolute, so devastatingly comprehensive, that they would be crushed under the weight of their own monumental arrogance. I would let them proceed with their timeline. I would let them confidently believe they had won the game, right up until the exact second I caused the digital floor to collapse completely beneath their feet. 3 days later, Julian insisted on hosting an opulent dinner party to officially celebrate our new home. The guest list was entirely his suggestion, carefully curated to include the highest-ranking executives and security directors from Vanguard Nexus Tech. On the surface, it appeared to be the ultimate gesture of a supportive husband showing off his successful wife. In reality, it was a meticulously orchestrated stage play. He was parading my superiors through the house to establish a rock-solid narrative. He wanted them to witness, firsthand, that I was the absolute master of this domain, the sole architect of the network, and the only person with the technical capability to manage the heavy servers humming quietly beneath our feet. I played my part with absolute, terrifying perfection. I slipped into a floor-length emerald silk evening gown, applied my makeup with a steady hand, and walked down the sweeping staircase to greet our guests. For 4 agonizing hours, I wore the radiant, practiced smile of a deeply fulfilled woman. I laughed at Julian's charming anecdotes. I allowed him to rest his hand affectionately on the small of my back, and I gazed lovingly into the eyes of a man who was actively measuring me for a federal prison uniform. The sheer psychological exertion required to suppress my disgust was suffocating, but the anticipation of the trap I was building kept my mind razor-sharp. The pivotal moment arrived just after the main course was served. Julian stood up, raising a crystal glass of expensive vintage champagne to propose a toast to my brilliance. He had draped his tailored suit jacket over the back of his chair, right next to my seat. I knew from my surveillance that he kept a secondary, encrypted burner phone inside the left breast pocket of that very jacket. It was the device he used to communicate with Clara and their overseas handlers. As the room fell silent and all eyes fixed on my husband, I reached down to my evening clutch resting on the floor. Concealed inside the small velvet bag was a military-grade magnetic data siphon, a highly specialized proximity cloner designed to extract raw data from encrypted devices through short-range radio frequencies. While Julian passionately praised my dedication to national security, drawing warm applause from my colleagues, I stealthily activated the cloner and pressed my clutch directly against the fabric of his hanging jacket. A tiny, silent vibration against my palm confirmed the data transfer had initiated. I sat there, sipping my champagne and beaming at him, while I ruthlessly sucked every single bite of his treasonous conspiracy straight out of his pocket. The moment the toast concluded and the conversation resumed its lively hum, I politely excused myself. I walked down the hall, entered the guest bathroom, and locked the heavy door. My hands moved with blinding speed as I connected the extraction device to my secure mobile terminal. The decryption software tore through his rudimentary security protocols in seconds. I scanned the raw text logs and intercepted emails. There it was, the final puzzle piece. I found the exact, confirmed timeline of their execution. They had scheduled the anonymous tip to the federal authorities for exactly 8 o'clock this coming Sunday evening. It was a time carefully chosen because it aligned perfectly with my strict weekend on-call schedule. I was required to be logged into the Vanguard Nexus Tech mainframe from home every Sunday night, providing them with the perfect excuse for why massive amounts of data were actively flowing through my network at that exact moment. I flushed the toilet, washed my hands, and reapplied my lipstick. staring into the mirror to ensure the mask of the perfect wife was securely back in place. I returned to the dining room, my eyes immediately seeking out Marcus. Marcus was the chief legal counsel at Vanguard Nexus Tech, but more importantly, he was a former cyber intelligence operative for the federal government. He was a man who understood the lethal nuances of corporate espionage better than anyone I knew. I approached him near the grand fireplace, seamlessly inserting myself into his conversation about the latest security compliance protocols. "You know, Marcus," I said casually, taking a slow sip of my water, "I was reviewing some theoretical threat models this afternoon. I was thinking about how devastating it would be if a hostile internal actor attempted to leverage a closed system to frame a primary administrator." Marcus paused, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly behind his glasses. He recognized the shift in my tone. "A theoretical model, Eva. That sounds oddly specific for a weekend housewarming party." "It is a highly aggressive scenario," I continued, holding his gaze with absolute, unyielding intensity. "If such a vulnerability were actively exploited, the administrator would need to deploy a honeypot operation immediately. They would need to isolate the malicious actors within a controlled, fake environment, and they would absolutely require immediate, deeply vetted external legal and federal support to close the net without triggering the internal alarms." I emphasized the words honeypot and external federal support. Marcus stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds. In our world, a honeypot was a trap set to detect, deflect, or counteract attempts at unauthorized use of information systems. He was not just a lawyer, he was a seasoned hunter. He read the micro-expressions on my face, the absolute absence of panic, and the cold calculation in my eyes. "I completely agree with your assessment, Ava," Marcus replied, his voice dropping an octave, completely devoid of its previous party warmth. "In fact, I believe that specific theoretical model requires my immediate attention back at the office. The legal firewall for a honeypot of that magnitude takes significant time to structure with the proper federal contacts." "I appreciate your dedication, Marcus," I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. Marcus abruptly set his glass down, made a polite, incredibly brief excuse to Julian about an urgent overseas compliance issue, and walked out the front door. The legal shield was now in motion. The federal strike team was being assembled under total secrecy. Julian wrapped his arm around my waist, kissing my cheek as we waved goodbye to our guests, completely oblivious to the fact that his perfect dinner party was the absolute beginning of his end. Sunday morning arrived with a suffocating, heavy gray overcast, matching the cold, mechanical rhythm of my beating heart. I stood by the kitchen island, clutching a travel mug of black coffee, and put on the final performance of my fractured marriage. I frantically typed on my phone, feigning absolute corporate panic. "Julian, I am so sorry," I said, injecting the perfect amount of breathless stress into my voice. "We have a catastrophic localized server failure at the downtown Vanguard Nexus data center. The entire firewall structure is collapsing. I have to go in immediately, and I have absolutely no idea when I will be back. It could take all day and all night." Julian looked up from his morning newspaper, masking his predatory excitement behind a flawlessly constructed mask of husbandly concern. "Oh no, sweetheart, that is terrible. Do you need me to pack you a lunch or bring you anything later? I was just going to tinker in the basement anyway." "No, I will order food to the server floor," I replied. Grabbing my heavy tactical laptop bag, I leaned in and kissed his cheek. The metallic scent of his cologne no longer made me nauseous. It just smelled like impending doom. "I love you. Wish me luck." "Good luck, Eva. I love you too," he lied, his eyes already drifting back toward the hallway leading to his biometric trap. I walked out the front door, climbed into my heavy utility vehicle, and drove exactly 4 miles down the road to an abandoned commercial parking lot I had scouted 2 days prior. I parked behind a towering, rusted shipping container, completely shielded from the main road. I killed the engine, but left the auxiliary battery running. I reached into the back seat and deployed a portable, military-grade satellite uplink receiver on the roof of the car. My vehicle was instantly transformed into an untraceable, encrypted mobile command center. I opened my laptop and tapped directly into Eleanor's hidden microcamera. The live feed buffered for a split second before illuminating my screen. It was barely noon when Julian walked right through the front door, practically dragging Clara by the hand. They were operating in broad daylight now, empowered by the absolute certainty that I was trapped in a windowless room downtown. Clara had shed her dark raincoat, wearing a sharp, dark sweater, her face flushed with the adrenaline of their impending $40 million payday. They moved quickly down the stairs, unlocking the heavy oak door of the server room. For the next 7 hours, I sat in the freezing cabin of my car, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, watching them finalize the encryption parameters. They were painstakingly ensuring that every single byte of the stolen government intelligence was irreversibly bound to my personal administrative credentials. As the digital clock on my dashboard ticked closer to 8 o'clock in the evening, the atmosphere inside the basement shifted. Julian cracked his knuckles, a smug, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He nodded to Clara. "Initiate the final boot sequence," Julian commanded, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Let us lock this data directly to her digital signature and get our money." Clara hit the enter key. That was my cue. The moment their localized system reached out to authenticate the final administrative lock, I unleashed the digital equivalent of a nuclear strike. I engaged the stealth malware payload I had meticulously coded over the past 3 days. It bypassed their crude external firewalls like a ghost walking right through a solid brick wall. Inside the basement, Julian and Clara saw a simple loading bar on their monitor. They had absolutely no idea that underneath that graphic, their entire reality was being violently rewritten. My proprietary algorithm executed a total cryptographic substitution. As their system attempted to stamp the treasonous files with my fingerprint matrix and retinal identification, my malware intercepted the request in a fraction of a millisecond. I completely purged my digital existence from the local server. In my place, I forcefully injected Julian and Clara's own biometric profiles. I had harvested Julian's fingerprints from his secondary phone and extracted Clara's digital markers from the hidden offshore accounts. But I did not stop at a simple identity swap. I reached into the parallel data tunnel I had established days ago and unleashed my counter payload. I flooded the metadata of the stolen government files with thousands of deeply encrypted documents detailing the exact anatomy of their conspiracy. I embedded the raw communication logs of their extortion, the falsified coroner reports from Clara's fake boating accident 3 years ago, and the detailed ledgers of every single dollar Julian had stolen from my credit line. I essentially welded their absolute guilt to the very treason they were trying to pin on me. Then came the financial kill shot. While Clara was busy watching the fake progress bar on the server monitor, my secondary script quietly infiltrated the decentralized cryptocurrency wallets they were using to hold their illicit funding. They had secured their digital vault with a series of complex smart contracts. I simply introduced a logic bomb into the blockchain ledger. In the blink of an eye, the script executed a forced, irrevocable transfer. I watched my secondary monitor as their entire balance, every single stolen cent they had accumulated to fund their escape, was instantaneously drained. The funds were immediately dispersed and donated to an international nonprofit organization dedicated to combating global cyber terrorism. The digital transaction was permanent. They were now 100% bankrupt. Down in the basement, the loading bar hit 100%. The screen flashed green. "It is done," Clara breathed out, a wicked smile lighting up her pale face. "The payload is locked. Eva Guzman is officially the biggest cyber traitor in the history of the United States." "Send the tip," Julian ordered, pulling his burner phone from his pocket. He confidently connected to the internal network router, the very one I was actively controlling, and drafted a brief, anonymous email to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrimes Division. He detailed the exact location of the stolen intelligence, provided the specific Internet protocol address of my home, and explicitly name me as the sole mastermind of the operation. He pressed send. Through my satellite uplink, I intercepted the outgoing email. I did not stop it. I simply let it pass through my honeypot filter, allowing it to carry the newly forged digital footprint straight to the federal authorities Marcus had on standby. Julian sighed heavily, wrapping his arms around his dead wife, thoroughly convinced he had just secured their billionaire future. He had absolutely no idea that he had not just pulled the trigger on a loaded gun, he had pointed it directly at his own head. He had just officially submitted his own arrest warrant to the highest law enforcement agency in the country. I closed my laptop, started the engine of my vehicle, and pulled out of the abandoned lot. It was time to go home and watch the fireworks. Exactly at 8 o'clock in the evening, the peaceful silence of my isolated suburban street was violently torn apart. The heavy reinforced glass of my custom front doors exploded inward, shattering into a million glittering pieces across the imported hardwood floor. Deafening sirens wailed relentlessly in the cold night air, painting the interior walls of the mansion in chaotic, aggressive strokes of flashing red and blue light. A heavily armed federal tactical team, clad in dark body armor and carrying assault rifles, swarmed into the foyer like an unstoppable tidal wave of righteous destruction. Federal Bureau of Investigation, get down on the ground right now. Keep your hands where we can see them, a booming, amplified voice commanded, the sound echoing fiercely through the massive house. Julian, who had clearly been waiting in the living room for this exact moment to begin his performance, threw his hands high in the air. He dropped to his knees, his face twisted into a flawless, perfectly rehearsed mask of absolute shock and innocent terror. He played the part of the bewildered, victimized husband brilliantly, right up until the exact second the tactical commander stepped aside, allowing me to casually walk through the shattered doorway. I was wearing my sharpest corporate suit, looking completely untouched by the surrounding chaos. I stepped carefully over the broken glass, my high heels clicking decisively against the floorboards, cutting through the shouting of the federal agents. The feigned panic on Julian's face instantly evaporated, replaced by a sickening, pale confusion that drained every ounce of color from his cheeks. "Ava, what are you doing here? You texted me that you were trapped at the downtown data center. What is happening?" I did not even blink at him. I simply looked past him, locking eyes with the lead digital forensic agent holding a heavy, encrypted tablet. "Check the primary biometric matrix on the basement servers immediately," I instructed cleanly, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. Two Federal Cyber Division experts sprinted up the stairs from the basement, their boots thudding heavily against the wood, their eyes wide with sheer disbelief at what they had just uncovered. "Commander," the forensic lead panted, holding up his glowing terminal for the entire room to see. "We successfully breached the local firewall using the backdoor protocols provided. The entire 4-terabyte payload of stolen government intelligence is sitting right there on the active drives. But there is a massive anomaly." "Explain the anomaly, Agent," the commander barked, keeping his weapon trained on Julian. "The system is not locked to Eva Guzman. Her digital footprint has been completely wiped from the internal registry. There is zero trace of her administrative credentials. The entire encrypted volume, along with a secondary ledger detailing massive international money laundering and wire fraud, is cryptographically bound directly to the retinal scans and DNA markers of this man right here. Julian." Julian scrambled backward like a cornered rat, his eyes darting frantically between me and the heavily armed federal agents. "No, that is absolutely impossible. It was her system. She is the senior architect. The system must be glitching, Eva. Tell them the system is malfunctioning. Tell them you set this up." Before I could even grace his pathetic lies with a response, a violent, physical scuffle erupted at the top of the grand staircase. Two federal agents dragged a thrashing, screaming woman down the steps by her arms. It was Clara. She had attempted to slip out the second-floor balcony, completely unaware that Marcus had coordinated a full perimeter lockdown nearly 2 hours ago. As she was forcefully shoved into the harsh, glaring light of the living room, A collective gasp rippled through the investigative team. The local police officers who had arrived to secure the perimeter recognized her instantly. She was the tragic local widow, the woman whose smiling face had been plastered across the evening news exactly 3 years ago. The dead woman had just been resurrected in my living room, caught red-handed wearing a dark tactical escape vest. "Clara," one of the local detectives whispered, lowering his flashlight, completely stunned by the impossible sight. I walked forward, stopping just inches from the expensive glass coffee table. I reached into my heavy leather laptop bag and pulled out a thick, heavily bound stack of printed papers. I slammed the stack down onto the glass with a sharp, resounding crack that silenced the entire room. "You will find the complete, unredacted communication logs right there," I announced, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a razor blade. "It details their exact extortion plot. The fabricated coroner reports from her fake boating accident 3 years ago, and the decentralized cryptocurrency wallets Julian used to drain my credit line. The digital vault containing their $40 million payoff has already been seized and entirely liquidated by the International Cyber Crimes Division." Julian let out a guttural, agonizing scream. The absolute reality of his total destruction finally crushed the breath out of his lungs. He fell forward, clawing at the hardwood floorboards, weeping and pleading at my feet. "Ava, please, you have to listen to me. She made me do it. I love you. I swear I love you. Please do not do this to me," he sobbed hysterically, the arrogant mastermind completely reduced to a pathetic, whimpering shell of a human being. I looked down at the man I had once promised to spend the rest of my life with. I felt absolutely nothing for him. There was no anger, no sorrow, just a cold, hollow silence where my love used to be. I turned on my heel and walked right past him, stepping over his reaching hands like he was nothing more than a ghost. Federal agents yanked Julian and Clara violently off the floor. Heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around their wrists, binding them to their inevitable fate. They were dragged out of the house, screaming and kicking, shoved aggressively into the back of a waiting armored federal transport vehicle. They were facing consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal prison, completely stripped of their stolen wealth, their freedom, and their sanity, with absolutely zero chance of ever seeing parole. I stepped out onto the expansive front porch, the red and blue lights continuing to flash against the tall trees of my isolated property. The house was a chaotic mess, but it belonged entirely to me. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the crisp night air. Julian had tried to turn my dream home into my digital tomb, but instead, my name would forever remain a source of absolute, suffocating terror in the darkest memories of those who dared to cross me. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are tuning in and listening to this story from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this thrilling ride today and want to help us keep producing these videos, please consider supporting Maya Revenge Stories on Patreon. You will get access to our absolute best, most intense, and exclusive true stories that are far too explicit and detailed for us to share on YouTube. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again for your time. Stay safe out there, and remember to always trust your instincts when someone seems just a little too perfect.